Darkness falls across the land. Creatures crawl in search of blood.
Nobody knocks off an old man in my neighborhood.
Hello there, welcome to my review of Eerie, Indiana, Episode 1, Foreverware, as part of my Halloween season. If you're unfamiliar with the show, I urge you to seek it out, as it's an absolute treat for fans of film and anthology series like The Twilight Zone or Outer Limits. It only ran for 19 episodes and is aimed at kids, which I was when it came out, but I think it's a show adults can still enjoy too. Especially as Joe Dante served as creative consultant, and it certainly seems like his fingerprints are all over the series, so if you're a fan of his, you will definitely enjoy it. So, on to episode 1, Foreverware. Written by show creators Jose Rivera and Carl Schaffer, and directed by Joe Dante, it introduces us to the Teller family. Parents Edgar and Marilyn, daughter Cindy, and son Marshall, whose point of view the series is told from. Marshall is played by Omri Katz, who would go on to star in Hocus Pocus. He also narrates the episode, setting up the town of Eerie, Indiana as a seemingly idyllic American small town, but with something weird beneath the surface. While set in the present day of the early 90s, the town itself has an intentionally 1950s vibe, the sort of unsettling normalcy Dante seems to revel in on the big screen in films like Gremlins and The Burbs. I don't want to take too much credit away from the creators of the show, Rivera and Schaffer, but it's hard to avoid some of the Dante trademarks. The plot of the episode sees neighbour Betty Wilson arrive with her twin sons, Bertram and Ernest Wilson. She's a spokesperson for Foreverware, a Tupperware-esque product invented by her late husband. She invites Marilyn to a Foreverware party at her home and gives the family a free sample, a sandwich tub that keeps food so fresh it contains a sandwich from 1974. But comes with a cryptic warning.
You've always got to make sure the lids are sealed tight. Otherwise, the aging process is accelerated.
It's a fantastic tease that maybe something isn't quite right, or it's just a marketing gimmick that allows everyone but Marshall to remain oblivious to what's really going on. Marshall himself might have ignored it as another weird but harmless interaction with a resident of Eerie, were it not for one of the twins handing him a note as he leaves.
One of them slipped me a note. There was a weird look in his eye. Something desperate. Yearbook 1964.
We're then introduced to Marshall's only friend and fellow believer in weird, Simon Holmes, a younger kid who acts as Marshall's sort of sidekick throughout the series. They discover a photo of the twins in a high school yearbook from 1964, and they haven't aged a day in nearly 30 years. They investigate the ancient sandwich, but can't see anything odd about it. Marshall returns it to the fridge, but without sealing it properly. Then the pair go and spy on the neighbour, discovering that food isn't the only thing she's been storing forever.
Good night, dumpling. Sleep tight.
But what can he do? He's a kid with largely disinterested parents, which is great for investigating the strange goings-on, but useless for actually doing anything about it. At the Foreverware party, Marilyn is introduced to a small group of equally well-preserved housewives. Meanwhile, Marshall breaks back in and is cornered by the twins, who beg him for help. Their mother has been preserving them since their father died in 1964, so they don't grow up and leave her, and they want his help. He returns that night and frees them from their plastic prison, leaving them to deal with their mother. The next morning, Edgar discovers the sandwich of 74 has turned into goo, and next door the Wilson boys are now the Wilson men.
Can we help you?
Of course, Marilyn thinks they're just adult relations, but Marshall knows the truth. And that's it. A simple story, well told, and all in just 23 minutes. What I love about this episode is partly how compact the storytelling is, using some well-worn tropes like the mother being bad at cooking and the dad being in his own world. We instantly know who this family is, and not only does that set them up perfectly for the plot, but it means the rest of the series can play with those stereotypes. We don't find out too much about the sister, Cindy, other than her name is spelled S-Y-N-D-I, which is enough for now, as she isn't really a part of this story. The same goes for Simon, who has an even briefer introduction, but again, for this story, we don't need to delve too deep. Where the depth really comes in is with the Wilsons. On the surface, even the revelation that Betty Wilson uses Foreverware to preserve herself and her kids isn't necessarily that sinister. People go to much greater lengths to preserve their youth than sleeping in a plastic box, and if that was an option, I'm sure there are plenty who would take it. It's not even that she's been keeping her sons as children for 30 years, although that is obviously quite evil. It's that she's doing it because of the grief of losing her husband. It's not because she's particularly vain, it's because she's desperate not to be abandoned, and goes to extreme lengths to prevent this. It peels away the veneer of respectability and exposes attitudes towards mental health in the 50s and 60s, where people were just expected to get on with it rather than dealing with their grief. On the surface, she is the perfect housewife and mother, an idealized version of homemaker, which seems anachronistic but not harmful, but whose grief has overwhelmed her to such a degree she has denied her children a life of their own. They also touch upon the nature of cultish behaviour, as Marshall worries about his mother.
Hi everybody, meet Marilyn Teller, soon to be the newest member of our Foreverware family.
Not if I got anything to say about it.
But this is secondary to the main focus of the story, and while it would have been interesting to explore the exploitative nature of multi-level marketing schemes, of which Foreverware seems practically wholesome compared to some of the more recent variations of this ancient scam, I think they made the right choice in keeping it simple. Especially when this is aimed at a younger audience who would likely be terrified of the prospect of not growing up, and not an audience of old farts like me who might actually enjoy the concept. It's also worth mentioning a few of the little Easter eggs in the episode, such as the twins being named Ernie and Bert. The adult versions of those characters are played by Don and Dan Stanton, who would also appear as twins in Joe Dante's Gremlins 2. The Foreverware ladies all have the surnames of various different food companies, and it's worth noting that the teller's mail is being attacked by crows, potentially foreshadowing later episodes. The only negative that I have is that because this was made in the early 90s, the picture quality isn't great, and this could really do with a crisp Blu-ray release, but I'm not holding my breath for that. All in all, I would have to give this brief but entertaining episode 5 out of 5 for quality as a pilot and as a story in its own right. Thank you. Goodbye.